Hey guys, welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, we're going to be discussing UFC 300. These last couple of days have been pretty interesting when it comes to UFC 300 announcements. We thought we were going to get more title fight announcements. Dana White hasn't spoken about any of it. Yesterday, he came out with some fight announcements that had nothing to do with UFC 300 besides Davidson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt, which we already knew. But besides all of that, let's discuss UFC 300 and what's been happening the last couple of days. And I'm sure that you've already seen many channels discuss UFC 300, and many feel like UFC 300 is going to turn out to be a big disappointment. Look, I don't think UFC 300 is going to live up to the expectations. It's probably going to be a solid card, but I think a lot of people, including myself, we're expecting more than just a great UFC 300. I think we were expecting banger matchups, and something that Lucas Tracy mentioned in his video that I just watched was that, you know, you don't want to see your formal typical title fights at UFC 300, you know, like Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards. Yes, that's the fight that should happen next, but it's a very formal title fight. Yang Wei Li versus Yang Yaonan, like another great fight that probably should happen in the women's strawweight division, but it's not a fight that belongs at UFC 300. So I get the criticism. And then there's some people, you know, your hipster MMA fans are like, oh, Belal Muhammad versus Edwards 2 would be a banger main event. It's all these WWE fans that don't want to see that, and that I disagree with that. You know what I'm saying? Just because somebody's not excited for Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards 2 doesn't make them a casual. Just because somebody's mad about Yang Wei Li versus Yang Yaonan happening at UFC 300 doesn't mean they're a casual, okay? Because I think the expectations for UFC 300 are fair, man. That's an event that is, you know, 6-7 years in the making. And I think fans want banger matchups. This is a special event, and I don't think the UFC is living up to the expectations. And besides the fights themselves, let's talk about the way Dana White has actually been announcing these fights, because I believe it was Wednesday night when he said he was going to drop one title fight announcement, and many MMA fans were waiting for hours and hours waiting. Man, what is he going to announce? He's only going to announce one fight. And then I think on Thursday, he was going to announce two more title fights. He comes out, you know, he knows people are waiting. He knows people are waiting for the announcement. He goes live and he announces Yang Wei Li versus Yang Yaonan. Dude, you could have dropped that announcement on any, you know, Monday morning, Tuesday afternoon. Like, why would you, when you know people are waiting, announce that fight? And I'll tell you why they announced Yang Wei Li versus Yang Yaonan is because I think they're in trouble. I don't think they have a good plan for UFC 300, because why would Dana White set himself up like that? Like, why would he set up the fans? He knows that people are, look, it's a great fight. Like I said, it's a great fight, but it's not a super fight. It's not a fight that you think, man, that should be at UFC 300. If you're going to put Yang Wei Li, I mean, put her against Alexa Grasso, make a super fight. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit more exciting. And even that, like, I wouldn't have announced it the way Dana White did. So I feel like he's almost setting himself up, and then he says, you know what, we have two more title fight announcements tomorrow. So we're like, okay, he's probably going to announce Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards 2. And then I was guessing that he was going to announce a fight with Alex Pereira. I think Alex Pereira is going to end up, you know, being the main event of this card. He doesn't announce anything. Why? I honestly think they're actually in trouble, because if they had UFC 300, like a lock card, like right now they actually have the card, he would have came out with an official announcement and announced the main card for UFC 300. But the fact that he's like, I'm going to announce something, and then he doesn't, and this, it tells me that everything is up in the air. That I think the UFC has realized that they don't have this banger main card for UFC 300. And right now they're trying to find something big. I mean, there's even rumors of Khabib coming back, which I don't believe at all. But there's rumors of Khabib coming back and then maybe fighting Leon Edwards. And you're like, why would that even happen? I mean, Belal Muhammad and Khabib, you know, they're friends. And we already know that Belal Muhammad is preparing for a fight. So why would Khabib all of a sudden fight Leon Edwards? It just makes no sense. But the rumors, right? Rumors. And I mean, if Khabib were to come back, let's entertain it for a couple seconds. It'd be incredible. I mean, that would save UFC 300, because Khabib coming back against Leon Edwards would be absolutely incredible, but it just doesn't even make sense. And like I said, Leon Edwards is not this big superstar, but if you match him up with Khabib or even an Islam, I do think that's a big enough super fight to have on the card. But the thing about UFC 300 as well is that some of these matchups, like yes, you have a lot of recognizable names. Like you have Charles Oliveira, you have Yuri Prohaska, Aljamain Sterling, Figueiredo and Cody Garbrandt, and those are big names. But you're not putting the best matchups. Like let's talk about Davidson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt. Yes, that's an incredible. That's a fight with that MMA fans know about. I mean, people know Cody Garbrandt, people know Davidson Figueiredo, but the matchup itself is not that exciting in my opinion. I would have rather see Davidson Figueiredo versus like a Peter Yan. I know Peter Yan is fighting Song Yadong, but in terms of like, it doesn't feel like it's going to be competitive. I mean, Cody Garbrandt can go out there and shock the world and beat Davidson Figueiredo, but it's not a matchup that like really gets me excited. You know what I'm saying? It's an okay matchup. I mean, it's a big step up for Cody Garbrandt. After defeating Brian Kelleher, like that's a big step up. Davidson Figueiredo just defeated Rob Font, so it doesn't really make sense for him to take a step backwards. It kind of feels like a step backwards in terms of the matchup. And I'm sure you've heard so many complaints about Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. A terrible matchup. It's a terrible fight. Like, why would they put Cody Brundage versus Bo Nickal? Give him a step up in competition. He doesn't have to fight a ranked fighter. But Cody Brundage, man, like I get he's coming off that win at UFC Austin, but Bo Nickal hasn't fought in quite a while. Like give him a good matchup if you're actually gonna put him at UFC 300. And I get it, he's not in the main card. I don't even think he's gonna be in the prelims. He's probably gonna be in the early prelims. But the point is that we want to see matchups that feel competitive, that are stylistically amazing fights. Yeah, they don't have to be title fights. Like I said, I don't have a problem with them putting Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad on the card, but it cannot be the main event. It just cannot be the main event for UFC 300 because it just doesn't make sense. And I almost feel like the UFC is going to try to make like Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya. They're going to try to put Holloway versus Gaethje to try to save the card, but it does feel like it's a little too late. I mean, I guess Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje is a BMF fight, but even the fans are not going to be too happy about that because they think, I mean, I agree with them. I think Justin Gaethje would crack Max Holloway's chin. Like, it's not a stylistic fight where you're like, man, who's going to win that fight? It's very competitive. Let's argue. Like, most people are going to be picking Justin Gaethje. And then when it comes to Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira, the trilogy, even though it's a big fight and Israel Adesanya is a big superstar, it doesn't feel as big as it should because Israel Adesanya is coming off that embarrassing loss against Sean Strickland where he got dominated for 5 rounds. So he's not even the middleweight champion. And then like the Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira fight would be way more interesting if like Israel Adesanya was still the middleweight champion and then Alex Pereira becomes a light heavyweight champion and then you make the trilogy because then Israel Adesanya is fighting for double champ status and he's also setting the trilogy. There's more at stake. You got to build this storyline. And right now the storyline just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like it doesn't feel like UFC 300 should be the conclusion of Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya because Israel Adesanya is coming off a loss. Alex Pereira is coming off 2 wins. He just won the title. He's a light heavyweight champion. And personally, I would rather see Alex Pereira fight Jamal Hill. Like to me, that's a fresh matchup. It's an interesting matchup. Jamal Hill defeated Glover Teixeira with ease. And I kind of want to see that build up, that fight. I think it's very intriguing. I think Jamal Hill could be very tricky on the feet. He's better than a lot of people give him credit for. But Alex Pereira has shown that he has a lot of power at 205. And his kickboxing is just levels above these guys. So I would rather see that for the main event. Like I'd rather see Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for the main event of UFC 300. But something tells me they're not going to go in that direction, which I understand, right? Jamal Hill's not a big superstar. He's coming off an injury. And I don't know if he's going to be ready for April, but maybe he will be ready for April. But most likely, I think the UFC is going to announce Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira 3, co-main event Bilal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards 2, feature fight Yang Yongnan versus Yang Wei Li, Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan, and Yuri Prohaska versus Alexander Rakic. And that's not a great UFC 300, guys. And I know you guys are going to be like, man, you're just an entitled MMA fan. I mean, look at UFC 299. Look at UFC 298. but I just wanted something a little bit more special out of UFC 300. I mean, honestly, no cap. The fight that I'm most excited about is Charles Oliveira versus Armin Tsarukyan, because that's a fight that's intriguing. I mean, Armin Tsarukyan is a great fighter. Charles Oliveira is a great fighter. He's a big star. Like, that's an interesting matchup. We just saw what these guys did to Dariush, and this is a #1 contender fight to see who's going to fight Islam Makhachev. I feel like there's more at stake when it comes to that fight. But like Yuri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic, like, yes, Yuri Prochazka is very exciting, but Alexander Rakic is not very exciting. So it's like, okay, like, Alexander Rakic might take him down, control him for 3 rounds and win a decision, or Yuri might knock him out, but it's not going to be one of those banger matchups, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like that's what's lacking with UFC 300, and I really do believe that the UFC right now is scrambling to find fights that are amazing, because I get it. I understand the UFC from their point of view, because I understand that it could be kind of tricky, because if you give your typical title fights, people are going to say, well, those are just typical title fights. But then if you get old retired veterans and you make these crazy matchups, people are going to be like, man, that looks like a gimmick fight. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that the UFC is in a weird position, because they have to make matchups that have significance, but that stylistically they're also fun, which could be very difficult in my opinion. So like, for example, like, I wouldn't want Nate Diaz to come back. Like, I wouldn't want that to happen. If he is going to come back, okay, then he could come back and do a Conor McGregor trilogy. But even some people are kind of already done with Conor McGregor. But let's be honest, like, if you put Conor McGregor at UFC 300, it makes it a banger card. It becomes a banger card right away. But that's because Conor McGregor is such a big superstar and he has so many fans. And, typically with Conor McGregor cards, his cards tend to be a little bit weaker, because they don't want to, spread out the pay-per-view points and stuff like that. But point is, guys, I think UFC 300 is in trouble. I think they're still scrambling for a main event. I don't think Dana White is one of those people that would come out and say that they're going to make 2 title fight announcements if they didn't have 2 title fight announcements. But I think he lied. I think maybe he thought that, these 2 fighters had agreed to fight each other. There's been maybe contractual, disagreements. Maybe they can't get one fighter to sign. Maybe one fighter's injured. So I feel like right now they're still scrambling to get some UFC 300 announcements, to get those big fights that people are expecting. And the only thing I would advise is for you guys to lower your expectations, man, because even though UFC 300 is not going to be that great, and, I don't blame people that are shitting on the card. If, if more crappy fight announcements happen, I'm going to be shitting on it too. But UFC 299 is incredible. UFC 298 is also pretty solid. UFC 300, even though, it's not the crazy matchups we were expecting, if you look at it, it's still a great card. I mean, Oliveira, Tsarukyan, Yuri Rakic, Calvers, Cater Sterling, not Nickel and Brundage, terrible. Figueiredo Garbrandt, like, yeah, I mean, I think Figueiredo's gonna win that fight. I mean, Cody Garbrandt has a slim chance, with his inside boxing, but they're not the fights that you're like, oh, damn, UFC 300 is crazy. You know what I'm saying? It's not. It's really not. And at this point, I just hope they make the right matchups. I hope that maybe the card delivers on the night, but I'm definitely lowering my expectations for UFC 300. And maybe you guys should too. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.